Perfect. Alexander, how are you doing in London? We're live, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great day, great weather, lots going on here. I mean, lots of it, I have to say, extremely disturbing. And we did that program the other day about the new act that's coming, the Official Secrets Act. But now we now have a new hearing on the Assange in August, in a few weeks. Which is very ominous and very mysterious and rather strange. And there's also been a decision in the Craig Murray case, which I'm not able to discuss because I don't have the full details. Nobody does, because we haven't had the full reasons. But again, that made me a bit worried. So all sorts of things are happening here, which I don't like. But London itself is fantastic. I mean, it's in its prime. It looks amazing. It's beautiful. Things have now opened up again, pretty much. So it's a glorious time to be in London, actually, I'd say.
All right. Well, this is the stream where we're going to talk about geopolitics during the dog days of summer. The dog days of summer, Alexander, I did some research, is from July 3rd to August 11th. That is the dog days of summer. You know why it's called the dog days of summer?
No, I've no idea.
All right, we got you there.
I have no idea.
It's called the dog days of summer because of some astrology stuff, like some star lines up with another star, which is the star of the dog or something like that during that time period. So it's the dog days of summer. It has nothing to do with the fact that dogs get hot during this time period. Or
nothing to do with that.
With the stars aligning. Yeah, it has to do with the stars aligning, and well, it is hot. Traditionally, it is hot, but hey,
it is. It's been pretty hot.
Yeah, I mean, the dog days of summer. Let's talk geopolitics. Hello to everybody, wherever you are in the world. I'm seeing people who are joining us from Australia, from the UK. I see Liverpool. I see San Fran. I see Serbia in the house. Thailand is in the house, and Norway, and Rileyville, Virginia, and Canada is joining us. Melbourne is joining us. Seattle. Let's see where else. Brazil, Romania, Bristol, UK, Kiev. Fantastic. Guys, hit that like on your way in the door. And also make sure to join us on theduran.locals.com. Make sure to join us there. We've got all kinds of great stuff on the way in our locals community. Alexander, a big thanks to Coach Red Pill for inviting us to his show, to his live stream the other day. We did a video with Coach Red Pill. It is linked on the YouTube community tab. You'll find a link to that video, which will take you to CRP's page, and just a fantastic guy, fantastic interviewer, and a big shout out and a big thank you to CRP. He's very gracious host.
Absolutely.
And all right.
A great program too. And as Alex said, a very gracious host.
All right. So let's talk about the news around the world. All right, Alexander. So here we go. We've got Biden with some federal mandates for the mask, which we can't really talk about on YouTube. We've got this Pegasus software, which is wreaking havoc all over the world, which we can't really talk about on YouTube. We got France passing laws making mandatory passports in France. I was actually the parliament that passed that law, which we can't really talk about on YouTube. We've got Boris Johnson in the UK going full authoritarian, which we have trouble talking about on YouTube. So, Alexander, what do you want to talk about?
We're in a time of freedom, and we're going through a second golden age of liberty, it would seem. But anyway, talking objectively, yes. Well, we can't really talk about these things, at least not in a way that they would probably merit. because, of course, if we do, we have all kinds of problems and we end up not being able to talk about anything, which is extremely...
Oh, we got election stuff in the U.S., by the way. Sorry, forgot that.
Yeah, no, we forgot that.
Maricopa County stuff, yeah. Which we can't talk about.
We can't talk about any of that, and all sorts of things we can't, or about a particular court case, or rather set of prosecutions that are happening in the United States connected to a certain event we can't mention, which took place in America in sometime around January. We can't talk about that too, and if we do, well, that's proof that we are in the pockets of all sorts of strange people, Moscow, in Florida, wherever they are. So we can't talk about many things, but we can talk about quite a lot, all the same, it seems to me. And the important thing always to understand is that all these events are connected. And they are connected because clearly there is, on the one hand, a drive, a push to try to control more and more things, because there's an urge for power. It always comes when that happens, when there's a sort of urge for power, a reach out for power. The people who are reaching out want to start taking and bringing things under control. But at the same time, the same people feel themselves increasingly insecure, and they're sensing that things are not going quite the way they intended to. And that makes them, of course, even more anxious to double down and control things. And so we have a strange situation where, on the one hand, we see all of these very important things going on in our countries that we can't really talk about. And then there is the overarching thing of a geopolitical crisis. And we are in the middle of a geopolitical crisis. And Alex talked about the dog days of August. And he also absolutely correctly mentioned in our previous live stream that summer is a dangerous time. And geopolitically, we are going through a very dangerous time. And I've been reading increasing commentaries now coming out of China, especially, in which the Chinese are openly talking about the possibility of war, an armed conflict in the Pacific, in the South China Sea. And I've just done a program which should be appearing on my own channel very soon, in which the Chinese explicitly warned Britain that if Britain sends its warships near the Chinese coast, then they may find themselves the target of what the Chinese refer to as accidental consequences being in inverted commas. Now, I have never known that kind of language being used before between great powers. That was never used during the Cold War. The Soviets were very careful not to talk like that to the United States. The US is very careful not to talk like that to the Soviet Union. So we have now, in an extraordinarily dangerous situation, the like of which I've never seen. And we see a major effort as a consequence, as part of the reason why we see this clampdown of control. And of course, the other thing that's going on, and this is where I think, as somebody who, has lived for a certain time, one of the great ironies of the situation, one of the things that really depresses me, is that the Chinese are behaving very much in some respects like the US used to do, in the sense that during the Cold War, you used to hear the Russians making all kinds of bluster, the Soviets make all kinds of blustering threats and claims and assertions, and the US would, at the same time as the Soviets were doing that, was going around the world cutting deals. And now it is the other way around. The Americans talk, and at the same time, it's the Chinese that cut the deals. And the US doesn't seem to know how to cut deals anymore. Of course, the deal maker in chief, another person whose name we probably can't talk about, is gone, or at least for the moment he's gone. And the present man in the White House, who probably we shouldn't name either, he's not really in the business of making deals, at least as far as I can see. But the Chinese are, and they're making deals in places like Central Asia, in Afghanistan, in the Central Asian states, or increasingly in places like Vietnam, which one had not expected, in Africa, in all sorts of places. They're cutting the deals. And one wonders whether the people in Washington have really grasped this, because it seems to me that the US is at great risk of being outmaneuvered.
Yeah. So this is what we'll do. I'll go through the live stream and I'll grab some questions from the live stream. I'll go through the super chats and I'll grab some questions via the super chats. Valley S and GEC are in the house and they are moderating, the very best moderators in all of YouTube, and just great to have them with us. And we're very honored to have them helping us out. Thank you very much, Valley S and GEC 812. Thank you for all that you do. A couple of announcements on our locals, the Duran.locals.com. I saw some people saying about doing programs where we're not so restricted. That's exactly what we have planned. Guys, get ready because you're going to have some really good live streams coming on locals. Short live streams, short videos. Alexander is hooked up technically. He's got all the gadgets and the gizmos, and a couple of more days and he'll be ready to really connect with all of you guys on locals. I'll also jump in here and there, and once we're up to speed, we'll be doing some shows together as well on locals, just to get a lot more content out there to you guys, all in one place. And I just want to stress that locals, you can go and you can consume the content by being a member. And if you want to get additional content that we may throw out there with a subscription, that's also cool. It's $5 a month. So you can go on locals, you can jump in, and you can enjoy everything that you enjoy on all our channels. And I want to remind everybody that you can also go to BitChute, to ODYSEE, to Super U, and to Rumble as well. And we have a great collaboration video coming out with the great Robert Barnes. Check out his page on locals as well. That is coming out this weekend. We do an awesome discussion on Cuba. Guys, you are not going to want to miss this collaboration. Robert Barnes, I mean, he just knocked it out of the park with his analysis on Cuba.
Absolutely. The best analysis of Cuba I have ever heard, and I've read heaps. I mean, and going all the way back to the 70s, I've read lots of things about Cuba. You want to understand Cuba's past, its present, and its future, well, go to that video and listen to Robert Barnes and listen to what he has to say. I mean, it's a tour de force.
Yeah, that'll be up most likely tomorrow. Actually, definitely tomorrow. So that's just some basic housekeeping. Let's jump right into it. Valley S in the house with $20. Thank you, Valley S. And Juha with €10. Thank you very much. And we'll get to our first question from Radu, which actually Radu sent an RON 10 as a test. And then another super chat, but this time with a question. And Radu asks, I'm from Romania. Sentiment at the moment has been very pro-Western, while some of it is caused by propaganda. I'm sure a lot of it is the memories of communism. Do you think that will ever dissipate, or are we destined to be yapping poodles?
It will dissipate. It will dissipate because, of course, what you're starting to get increasingly now. I mean, I obviously remember communism very well. I never lived in a communist country, but I remember it very well. I mean, it was the overarching story of my life. But you get people now who are already adults who have grown up in a world which, at least in Europe, has no connection to it. So eventually time will move us forward and we will go further and further beyond that point where that system existed in Eastern Europe. And people who did not experience it are going to start worrying about the things that exist today. And one of the most interesting and disturbing facts, and one of the things that's definitely going to make them more concerned as we move forward, is that many of the things about communism that were so objectionable are now reproducing themselves, but not in the formerly communist East, but in the formerly anti-communist West. I mean, you can see the same kind of controls and surveillance and restrictions on what people could say, and indeed even what people could think, and what kind of art they could enjoy, what kind of films they should see, all of those kind of things that are now appearing in ever greater scope. That was more what used to exist under communism. And of course, we're also starting to see and experience, and I think this is also going to grow, material goods shortages, economic instability, all the problems, again, that we used to associate with the East. So yes, for the moment, I agree. There's a very strong anti-communist feelings in many countries in Eastern Europe, but I think in time that will change, and that period will be just history, and it will not be the thing that determines people's attitudes in the present day. And it's extraordinary how perspectives can change. I'm going to give one example of one country where perspectives changed radically, and that is, I remember Turkey. I used to travel there. I remember how vehemently anti-Russian, for example, Turks were during the Cold War. And it's been startling to see how completely that has changed. And that, in my opinion, is independent of Erdogan. It's simply because the experiences that Turks and Turkey has today are so completely different from what they used to be before. And that's one of the reasons why things have changed, and they will change everywhere.
It has a lot to do with travel too.
Absolutely.
Alexander.
Yeah.
A lot to do with travel. The minute that Turkey started to open its doors to Russians and to Russian tourists, that's when the two countries really started to change how they view each other. That's why they want to restrict people from traveling.
Indeed, that's why
the more they can keep people apart, and the more they can keep people from visiting different countries and one another, the less we're going to learn about each other, the less you're going to sit back and say, you know what? This country, these people are not what I thought they were. These people from Russia are not like that, or these people from France are not like that, or the US, whatever it is. And they hate that. That's why they do their very best to make sure that visas going to Russia or Russia to the EU or other countries are so difficult, because they want to keep people apart as best as possible. That's the reason they do it. Remember, the EU, Alexander, the European Union was all about free movement, free travel. You can just get on a plane, get off the plane, and go everywhere. What a bunch of freaking bullocks that was. Absolutely. It is now harder to go from one EU country to another. I have to go there. I have to get filmed and cameras everywhere and put my passport through a scanner and tracked everywhere I go. If you don't have free movement and free travel in the EU, what the hell is the damn thing for? But anyway, travel plays a big role, and that's why they keep us apart. That's why they're keeping us apart from traveling. They're making it so hard because they don't want us to interact. They want to keep everyone divided.
That's entirely true. And your points about the EU are spot on. And with respect to Russia, I remember way back in 2018 when there was the World Cup there, how the British government actually campaigned in Britain to dissuade British football fans from traveling to Russia. I mean, it was most bizarre, actually. I mean, they were giving all kinds of threats. They were telling that if people went to Russia at that time, they might face violence and all kinds of strange and bizarre things. And the result was that a lot of people were deterred from going. And those who did go were very few, but those who did go loved it there and made that point. And of course, that was reported, but only in the sports pages of the British newspapers, which of course are under less stringent control than the political pages are. But you're absolutely right. Travel makes a huge difference. It completely transforms people's perspectives. It transforms the perspectives Russians have about the outside world, but it also transforms the perspectives the outside world has, not just about them, but about ourselves, about each other. And the fact is that what we've seen over the last 2 years, at least, the last year, this year and last year, is restrictions on travel being reimposed in a way and to an extent that I might never have imagined.
Yeah. And let me just jump into the live stream real quick and read what people are saying, Alexander, and you can comment. Whatever you want, just jump in. Klaus says, communism is never meant to be good, and the goal is feudalism. Gary says, guys, one thing about communism never affected us, but communism is bothering us now from our own government. And Indy Prime says, one strength of communism is the subversion of national identity in favor of party identity by forcefully making themselves essential over time. National identity will return with individual freedom. Well, excellent observations.
Very interesting, very good excellent observations. Yes.
And Simon is coming in with the super chat, and he says, "Are we one miscalculation from a third world war, which even if it remains confrontational, will do untold damage and kill hundreds of millions? Discuss. Guns of August. Anyone?"
The Guns of August. Well, I have to tell you, I am reading more and more pieces in the Chinese media, and in fact, parts of the US media which write about China, which fill me with concern. I mean, I've been reading, as I said, these articles about in Global Times increasingly about how the Chinese are prepared to take action against the Western powers, especially the British Navy specifically. Just done a program, as I said, about this, and I think there is a danger of miscalculating, and we discussed this in this program. We discussed this in the program we did with Coach Red Pill. I think both sides, both the Chinese and the US, believe that the other is bluffing. They think that if they call the bluff, then they will humiliate the other side, and that there isn't any real risk of anything going wrong. I think that's an utterly reckless and irresponsible idea. I think far from each side bluffing, they've now maneuvered themselves, each side, into a position where they might find it extremely difficult to back down. So if that is exactly the kind of situation where a conflict becomes far more likely and a mistake becomes possible. Now, if we do have some kind of armed clash, and I generally do believe if it's going to happen, it's most likely to happen in the Pacific, but an armed clash between the great powers, I should say, then I strongly and sincerely hope that before it escalates out of control and reaches the stage of a World War III type scenario, that the wiser heads on both sides will prevail and will find some kind of compromise, as happened during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. But all the rhetoric at the moment is extremely nerve-wracking and worrying. And there are fleets and warships and missiles and aircraft being deployed. And of course, China and the US do not have a hotline. They do not communicate with each other in the way that the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War used to do. So there is a real risk that things could turn very bad and very dangerous, that there could be a miscalculation. And if that happens, there's also a risk that it could all spiral out of control.
Who are they going to, and then you ask yourself in the US right now, who are they going to talk to? Biden, Harris, who exactly? Did you see the video of Austin getting off the plane to meet some other military officials? I don't know if you saw it. It came out last night. I haven't
seen it,
but it's making its rounds. And I'll do a video on it because he comes off the plane, Alexander. This is the Secretary of Defense, the top military guy, and he comes off the plane, and I don't know. He's wearing like a full face covering. He's wearing a shield. Yeah. The other military guys are wearing coverings and shields as well, those big shields. And it just you look at it and you sit there and you say, this is just getting to the point of ridiculous. Well, and the world is watching this. This is your top military guy? Absolutely. This guy?
Absolutely. That's entirely right. I mean, this is how they are. I mean, they're hiding. and your point about who gives the orders in Washington is absolutely well taken. It's completely well put, because if the president himself is not able to give orders and the vice president doesn't command any confidence, then what legitimacy and authority do any orders that are given carry? If, let's say, Austin gives an order and somebody in the military doesn't agree with it, they'll say, is this approved by the POTUS? What if the POTUS isn't able to confirm one way or the other? During the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK was in complete control of the US government. He was able to negotiate directly with the Soviets. He arranged a back channel with the Soviet ambassador, Anatoly Dobrynin, in Washington. He was sending messages backwards and forwards to Nikita Khrushchev in Moscow. The two leaders were in charge. If there is no one in charge and we're in an escalation situation, who is there to call a stop? Who is able to do what Donald Trump did back in 2020 when there was the clash over, the situation over Soleimani, and it looked as if for a time there was going to be a clash between the United States and Iran, and he was able again to set up a back channel and bring the situation under control. If there's no one like that in Washington, then the dangers multiply many times fold. And that is a most incredibly dangerous situation. I can only compare it with the situation in Berlin in July and August 1914, the very months that we're living through now, in which, again, it was completely unclear who was in charge in Berlin. The Kaiser, the emperor, was discredited and indecisive and couldn't make up his mind. And the Chancellor, Bettmann Hollweg, was somebody who carried no authority independently. So in that kind of situation, there was no one who could go out of his way and say, stop. And that ended in disaster in 1914. And we could, dare I say, find ourselves in the same situation today again.
Yeah. The Revokist 2790 says, who goes first, Biden or Kamala? Kamala really turned out to be, I think she turned out to be worse than they ever had imagined. I mean, she's a complete bust, bust.
Far worse. I'm going to say it. I think they miscalculated completely. And I think that the reason that the setup in Washington is still as it was is because Kamala has not been able to take over in the way that it was intended that she would. And that has created this stasis because clearly she's not able to fulfill the role that she was selected for. Why anybody?
And Biden is diminishing fast, and this is the problem. They've got Kamala, who they're looking at. They're going, my God, this is worse than I ever imagined. She couldn't run a lemonade stand. There's no way she's going to be able to do anything in the White House. And then they got a Biden who's just like diminishing rapidly before our eyes. I mean, every day it's getting worse and worse.
Yes.
And I don't think they know what to do.
No, I don't think they know what to do because, of course, they can't get rid of both of them. That is impossible. And if they did, who would they put in their place? Nancy? I mean, Nancy is, frankly.
She is kind of running the show. I mean,
well, she is running.
She's kind of running the show now.
She is running the show, but I mean, to the extent that anybody is. But I mean, realistically, I mean, she's not able to move into the White House. I mean, I think that would be. I think if that were to happen, I mean, we would have not just a political crisis, but a political farce. And I don't think even the Democrats would want to go that far. So, as I said, we have a situation where they're stuck because the person that they were anticipating would slip into the role, into the shoes. Once the old guy had been pensioned off to a happy retirement. It's just not up to it. And I mean, not just not up to it, visibly not up to it. Now, why they ever thought she was, that is the big mystery. I mean, but it always seemed to me that these people were profoundly out of touch with reality. But now it's caught up with them, but it's also catching up with us too, because though we are not responsible for their miscalculations, we are nonetheless trapped in the consequences of them. We are on a runaway train, which has no driver and which we didn't, set going, but which we can't ourselves get off. Not a happy situation for us either.
Yeah, everyone around the world. No one asked for this. No one wanted this.
No one asked for this. No one wanted this. Nobody voted for it. Nobody voted for it. People who voted for, for the winning side in the election didn't vote for this. Yeah. At least most people, the vast majority of them. But that's what we have. Mm-hmm.
All right. From Boris says, communism wasn't as totalitarian as we have been told. People traveled across borders in Eastern Europe. We seldom hear the other side of the story.
Oh, yeah.
I will say this: the direction that they are taking us towards appears to be 10 times worse than many of the countries during the communist times. And I did live for short periods of time during communism under the Soviet Union. I was fortunate enough to visit a couple of summers to see what it was like and got a taste for it. And at least you knew what you got.
Yeah.
At least you knew what you were getting. You knew the deal. Now it's a lot worse, and a lot of it's because big tech and surveillance and all that stuff has increased dramatically.
I entirely agree. I mean, I was actually, by the way, I read a couple of years ago a comparison between the surveillance systems that the Stasi had in East Germany and what now exists. And I mean, the Stasi were making, were dealing with almost, archaic like tools. I mean, they would be able to sort of put wiretaps on a couple of hundred people at a time. I mean, not because they didn't want to put wiretaps everywhere, just because the resources didn't make it possible to do the kind of surveillance that you have now. I mean, it just wasn't possible. There wasn't the computer power, there wasn't the processing, there wasn't the means. And today, we've left all that far behind. And the other thing I would say is, and this I have heard from many people, I visited communist countries, but very briefly. The other thing I've heard from people who lived through that time is that, of course, in many communist countries, especially after the sort of Brezhnev era, during the Brezhnev era and later, what you did by yourself, what you said to your friends, things like that, that wasn't a problem. And you didn't risk losing your job.
Just to clarify, that's what we're talking about is the Brezhnev era past. We're not talking about
Stalin and all that.
Yeah, everything.
No, we're not.
We're talking about the
But by that time, I mean, they'd reached the point when they weren't even trying anymore to control people in that kind of way. Now, if you say something in public, if you sort of tweet a comment which might be completely innocuous, or which might once have been considered completely innocuous, well, you can have your accounts blocked and closed. You can have your job. You can be out of your job. You can face consequences and threats, the like of which, I mean, I could never have imagined before in any Western country, and abuse too. Yeah. And that's not something, people individually were exposed to in the same way in the latest communist era. And, I could say that with some confidence. If you went out of your way, to unfurl banners in Red Square, well, that would be different, obviously. But in your private life, you had a quite a surprising degree of personal autonomy. And that is something that is being threatened in the West now. And in some ways, the totalitarian urge in the West is now extremely strong and stronger than it was even in, the sort of Brezhnevite era of communism.
Yeah, right now it's still an urge. I mean, they're putting out stuff and they're putting things into policy. Yeah, but it's still at that very, very early phase.
Exactly.
Let's see how far they go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let me go to some super chats here from Simon. If Trump were still in power, would the CCP dare risk being so aggressive on the world stage? The Biden administration is a strategic temptation for the wolf warrior faction in China.
I agree, because of course what it is it's the worst possible combination. It's both weak and belligerent at the same time. So it says enough things to convince many people in China that it's an adversary, but at the same time, it's so chaotic, disorganized, and all over the place that it is a very powerful temptation at this moment for the Chinese to really assert themselves against it. That's why I said miscalculation is a very real possibility. If Donald Trump was around, now, I know people always criticize us because we bring up the subject of Donald Trump, but if Donald Trump was around, he would be on the phone to Xi Jinping they'd be able to talk to each other. They'd be able to set out red lines. You'd be able to say to Xi Jinping, look, you go this far, but no further. And if you go further, this will happen. And Xi Jinping would have been able to say, yeah, I understand. And of course, the converse is true. You go this far and, we will act. But there were leaders. There were people in charge. In the absence of someone in charge, where there's no clear red lines and no clear certainty that any leader in Washington would be able to enforce any red lines, of course it's a standing temptation for someone to test them. And the Chinese at the moment are doing so. I have to say, and I know some people in China follow us now. I am alarmed by some of the things I'm reading in the Chinese media now. I mean, they're very strong, but I do think that people sometimes in China too need to take a step back and consider very carefully the implications of some of the things that are being said and where this could all lead. And I think that, we're looking at very little diplomacy, and I accept this perhaps very difficult to conduct diplomacy with the United States at the moment. But, words have consequences. And if you lose control of your rhetoric, you can become trapped by it and led into things which you might subsequently regret.
Yeah. From Simon, without the U.S., how will Europe ensure it retains access to Middle East oil? Greta may get her way sooner than anyone wants.
It's profoundly true. The reality is, this is the other thing, which as a person who lives in Europe, Britain, Greece and whatever, it's been one of the most depressing things is to see Europe's total collapse, both economically and culturally and as a diplomatic force. And I'm not talking about Europe collectively, I'm talking about the individual countries. There was a time when the opinions of nations like Britain and France and Germany counted for something. Nowadays, who in the Middle East pays any attention to what Europe says? Once upon a time, a British or German leader going to Ankara would have been received with respect. When you send someone like Ursula von der Leyen instead, well, we saw what happened with Erdogan. You go relegate her or go put her away, far away in some sofa, away from the main action, go out of your way to humiliate her, and everybody laughs. Nobody takes Europe seriously, and they cannot do so because Europe, the EU, is not a state. It has no authority, none of the authority and force that a state has. So, of course, no one takes it seriously. All it does is preach.
Yeah. From Brando Commando, I feel like if China tried to take Taiwan, the same thing would happen to China that happened to Russia over Crimea. Europe will align with the U.S. to sanction and divest from China for moral reasons, and anti-Chinese sentiment will dominate the West.
Yes, I think this is true. I think this is quite correct. There would be a huge amount of a huge surge of anti-Chinese rhetoric and feeling. The Chinese are saying, well, we'll absorb it. And we're now, the world's either the world's biggest economy or the world's second biggest economy, depending on how you measure us. And if you try and do that, well, we can do perfectly well without you. And we've got Russia on our back. We've got all the raw materials we need now because the Russians, our friends, will supply it. And we will just go on getting stronger and we will eventually win through. So I agree. I think that is exactly the risk the Chinese are inviting. But at the moment, they are talking as if it doesn't matter. And, one has to say this. China is in a far stronger position than Russia was because it's a more powerful country. It's got a much bigger economy. And of course, it has an ally in Russia, which Russia didn't have in China during the 2014 crisis. And I think that's a thing to always understand. I think, and I'm going to say this again, I think the Chinese are overestimating the strength of their position. And I think they're running the risk of taking risks which they may one day regret. But that is the sentiment in Beijing at the moment.
All right. From the live stream, Indie Prime says China needs an external enemy for propaganda purposes because their infrastructure outside the rich city districts is falling, such as dams and cheap housing, high rises. And Lena says the dragon is old, patient, and wise, but it has fiery breath if needed.
Yeah.
Now fire is needed to burn off trash. So a lot of different views on China.
Well, lots of different views. Now, look, I went to China some years ago. It's back in 2017. I haven't been there since, so I can't speak about the situation now. I have to say, I traveled extensively in what might be called the Shanghai, Nanjing metropolitan area. And I have to say that I found what I saw of Chinese infrastructure absolutely awesome. But what it is like elsewhere in China, I am in no position to judge. Obviously, one reads lots of things, some of them glowing, some of them critical. But I've learnt, especially with respect to China, that without actually seeing it for yourself, you can't really make an assessment. I will say that some of this infrastructure that I saw, massively impressive as it was, looked to me gigantically overinvested. So you'd go to a rather small place and you'd find the most enormous railway station, such as you might have expected, for example, in some great city of millions of people. And it looked disproportionate sometimes, and it suggested distorted investment. At least that seems to me probably a more realistic assessment of the problems of China than saying that it's, decaying or falling apart in other places. So malinvestment rather than lack of infrastructure. But I can't give a completely accurate assessment of this. And I doubt, by the way, that anybody can, because China is so vast that trying to get a sense of what's going on across the entire country is probably very difficult outside the Zhongnanhai compound in Beijing, where the Chinese leaders are. But it is a country with a huge history behind it, 5,000 years, something the Chinese are very, very conscious of. And they do have enormous experience of diplomacy, and they are very, very historically, very strategic, and they plan ahead. And I think they need to remember that themselves sometimes, because, as I said, some of the rhetoric that's coming out of Beijing at the moment, I find frankly alarming, and I think is dangerous.
Yeah. Oragame says the Three Gorges Dam in China is China's Achilles heel in a war. And Kirill says, isn't that hypocritical? The UK went to war with Argentina over a couple of islands. Oh,
indeed. I'm not here to defend Britain at all. And I take the point entirely. I think that there is so much hypocrisy in what is being said about things around the world. Let's give another example, which for me is a more striking one, because it's one that comes much closer to home. Constant criticism of Russia about Crimea, and the annexation of Crimea, the things that the Russians did in Crimea or are alleged to have done there, and compare that with Cyprus. The Turkey, and this isn't an anti-Turkish point, it's simply a statement of historical fact. Turkey did in Cyprus all the things that Russia is alleged or has done in Crimea. There was a political crisis in Cyprus. There was a political crisis in Ukraine. The Russians intervened in Crimea because of the situation created by the political crisis in Ukraine. The Turks invaded Cyprus as a result, or justifying it, because of the political crisis in Cyprus. The Turks have occupied a large part of Cyprus, and they've driven out the people who were formerly there. The Russians have not driven out people from Crimea. It's actually a more moderate event. And of course, Russia and Crimea are connected to each other in a way that northern Cyprus is not connected to Turkey. Endless criticism of Russia, sanctions against Russia. who talks about Cyprus and Turkey? I can't see the difference, actually, if you accept the Western narrative about Crimea with what has happened in Cyprus. Nobody says this. You won't find any article that discusses it. You won't find any person who makes those comparisons. Hypocrisy? Of course. The world is full of hypocrisies. And I'm going to say it frankly and straightforwardly. If you want to see the world capitals of hypocrisy, they are in London and Washington. And, you know, I'm sorry if people in Britain and America who are offended by this, but it is true. And I'm sorry if I feel a little bit strongly about this, but obviously Cyprus and what happened there in 74 is very close to home.
Well, I mean, with Crimea, we should do a video on Crimea because this is where words matter. And this is one of Russia's biggest weaknesses is their international media operation. Everyone is always thinking the Russians have this great, you know, media machinery. They're actually very, very bad at marketing to an international audience and PR to an international audience. And this is where words matter, where you use the word annexation, where in reality, what happened in Crimea was that the peninsula ascended into Russia. And there's a lot of differences between what happened in a place like Cyprus and what happened in Crimea. And you could talk about that Crimea was an autonomous republic. You could talk about the fact that they had a vote to ascend into the Russian Federation. You could talk about the fact that there was no invasion that took place because troops were actually stationed in Crimea because they had an agreement with Ukraine. You could talk about the coup and the fact that the vote of the Crimean people was rendered null and void because of a US-EU coup d'etat. There's a lot of stuff that you can talk about. And the most important thing that we could talk about is, like you said, no people were displaced. No one died, which is important. There were no people that were thrown away from their homes. There were no refugees, none of that stuff. Anyway.
No, I mean, I'm comparing narratives.
Yeah, you're comparing narratives. But we should do a show. We should do a show on that because I think there's a lot that still needs to be cleared up there. And the effects of what the European Union and the US did after those events is still with us today.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, straightforwardly, de facto, they've supported it. They supported what happened in Cyprus.
Well, Newland was sending goons. I mean, she was sending goons to go into Crimea and to take it over. I mean, this was Newland sent a force there that was going to go in there and take it over. And it wasn't the Russian army that stopped them. It was actually militias in Crimea that formed to stop them from entering the peninsula because these guys were coming in there to start trouble. And they were going in there to start a civil war in that area, in that region. And this was under Newland's orders.
Absolutely. Absolutely correct. No doubt about it. I mean, the US was directly implicated. It's not even controversial, by the way. It was directly implicated in the events in Kiev in 2014. I mean, she was caught saying things like this.
McCain went there and gave a speech.
Absolutely.
U.S. senator pops up in another country and gives a speech. I mean, it's
absolutely.
On a side note, Turkey is on fire, massive wildfires across half the country. So our thoughts go out with the people there and be safe and hopefully they get through it because fires. Terrible things.
Terrible things. Absolutely.
All right. Where do I want to go? Let's go to the super chats. Let me see if we got some. Mark Hewitt is coming in with a 20-pound super chat. He says, given Biden's weakness, others will fill the gap. The states themselves will take more power for themselves. Do you think Bojo is trying to take advantage in the West? Why send a carrier group through the South China Sea?
I am completely at a loss to understand what that carrier group is doing in the South China Sea. I mean, I really do. I mean, it's not going to impress the Chinese. They're not going to take it seriously. So why send it there at all? It's not going to impress the Americans because they don't need it. So what are we doing sending a warship to, a fleet, a carrier task force, which, by the way, I mean, we talk about carrier task force, and I'm certainly not going to criticize or denigrate the Royal Navy, but it's not comparable to a US Navy carrier task force. I mean, it's a much smaller warship, carries far fewer aircraft. It doesn't have the reach or the power that even one US Navy carrier task force has. And we shouldn't pretend that it does. So what is it doing in the South China Sea? And if Bojo is really thinks that because the POTUS in the Washington is basically absent without leave, the leaders of the region, you know, the Philippines and Indonesia and Japan and all the rest will come flocking to his door and talking to him in Downing Street, then he is delusional. So I don't know what we're doing there. I really don't. I mean, the only time that the British Navy in recent years, I'm talking about in recent years, has made an impact in that part of the world was in a James Bond film that appeared in the 1990s. I mean, this is ludicrous diplomacy, in my opinion. And yes, there is a vacuum of power in Washington. And yes, domestically, within Washington, I think it is going to be increasingly filled by the states. We're already seeing the states asserting themselves in all sorts of ways, which might not have been the case a few years ago. But the idea that Britain can substitute for the United States is folly. And I think we should put that idea to sleep.
Is Boris Johnson losing his mind?
Well,
I mean, I say that, you know, but is he losing his mind? Because it seems like the wheels are coming off in various arenas.
Absolutely, and you know, it's a fact that over the last couple of weeks or so, we've actually seen the Conservative poll lead decline, which, given how weak and fragmented and incompetent and indeed ridiculous the Labour opposition is remarkable. I mean, he should be 20% ahead, not falling back into single figures ahead. So, I mean, he is losing his mind. I mean, he is, I think, well, certainly he's losing his grip, and he's losing his grip on reality. I think he's allowed his Churchillian rhetoric, which he does, unfortunately, have a propensity to fall back on. I think it's running away with him. I mean, what did they say? You know, there was it a man called Dan Quayle, you know JFK, you know John Kennedy. Well, Boris needs to understand he's not Winston Churchill, you know, who he always admires and of who he once wrote a biography. He's not Winston Churchill, and for better or for worse, Britain is not the kind of power that it was in the 1940s, and it shouldn't try and behave like it was.
Yeah, that was said about Dan Quayle, actually, during a debate with the vice presidential debate with, I forgot who was the vice president running at that time for the Democrats. But that was said about
Lloyd Benson.
Lloyd Benson. Or yeah, correct. Let me go to Simon's super chat, which is, could Europe survive without Chinese goods? Would cause inflation and interest rate rises, would kill the euro and indebted South Europe.
Well, I don't know. I don't know whether Europe would survive or not, but I would point out at the moment all the tendency. This is the other extraordinary paradox, and it's a paradox that Alex has already pointed out, which is that Europe and the United States at the moment are increasing their imports of Chinese goods. The Chinese trade surplus is skyrocketing. And by the way, and this is the other weird paradox, the United States is increasing its imports of Russian energy products. It's been trying to stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline being built because it says, you know, it wants to increase exports of liquefied natural gas to Europe. And in fact, far from being an exporter of liquefied natural gas, it's actually importing oil from Russia in increasing quantities. And given the kind of policies that the administration in Washington is following with respect to energy, that dependence is going to grow. So I think quite right. I mean, cutting off Chinese goods at the moment would, at this moment in time, cause a massive upwards spiral in inflation, and it would create supply problems and all sorts of things. I mean, Alex was saying at the start of this program that I bought all sorts of products, all American, by the way. But when I say American, with Chinese components in them, because the company that I bought these products from, which is Apple, makes so many of its goods in China now. And if the trade was completely cut off, what would happen? And this is something that can be dealt with, but it needs to be done in a systematic and structured way. And of course, system and structure is not what you're getting in Washington at the moment. And if you are looking for it from the European Union, well, forget it, because Ursula von der Leyen and her cronies are absolutely not up to it.
Yeah, it's all about money. It's all about money. So I mean, they're saying this and that about Russia and China at the same time.
Yeah.
There are people making tons of money from the exports and from the oil and the natural gas and everything. And the scary part about it is that, you know, when they flip that switch and there's more money in the war racket than there is in the exporting and importing and the oil racket, then we're going to have that war. That's what's going to happen. I mean, think about the first thing Biden did when he got into office. What was it? To get rid of the Keystone. So, I mean, it's to me, all the moves that they make, and when I mean Biden, I mean the Biden machinery, I mean Biden, the person, all the moves they make are just about enriching this elite class. And when that switch is going to be flipped, that's when you know that they're all going to sit there and they're going to say, you know what, now we can make a lot more money in going after, I don't know, maybe China in the South China Sea or wherever it is. We can make more money there. So let's just forget all this importing and exporting stuff, and let's do that racket now. So. Absolutely,
I completely agree with that. I mean, you know, this is again, it's a symptom of how dysfunctional the situation has become, where people are saying one thing, and their money, which of course always talks more loudly, tells you that they're actually thinking something completely different. They talk anti-Chinese rhetoric, and they're making money from the China trade and the Russia trade too. And that's what it's all about at the moment. Follow the money, as was once said memorably.
Don't listen to anything they say. Look at what they do.
Yeah.
From Simon, China couldn't send a carrier to the Atlantic. The UK can to the Pacific. Our subs are among the best in the world, and their crews are the best.
No doubt. I completely agree. I mean, there's no conceivable. Well, first of all, China does have 2 aircraft carriers, but they're pretty small, and they're not really comparable, certainly not to a US Navy carrier. But the point about sending a British carrier to the Pacific, and we do have exceptionally good submarines, I don't dispute any of that. But if we send a carrier to the Pacific, if we send it to the close to the China coast, then we are entering waters which are dominated not just by the Chinese Navy, but by the Chinese Air Force and by Chinese ground-based missile systems. And there's an article an editorial in Global Times, about which I've done a editorial. And very interestingly, it specifically warned about China's possession of these ground-based missile systems and of the threat they would pose to any aircraft carrier. China does not have a navy with a global reach. As part of the Western alliance, Britain can send its navy around the world in a way that China can't. We do so under the shadow, if you like, of the far more powerful US Navy. But near the Chinese coast, the closer you get to China itself, the more completely the balance changes. And it changes eventually to the point when the odds become overwhelmingly in China's favor.
Yeah. Reckless Abandon says, doesn't the U.S. only have 3 operational carriers with the rest all at a home port? And Straight Arrow says, with missile tech so advanced these days, carrier groups are limited as a force, as a projection force.
I think that let's see with the 3 carriers. I mean, the thing to understand about US carriers is that they're so expensive to operate that even the United States can't realistically afford to have them steaming around all the time, all of them simultaneously. So the US has 11 carriers. One of them, the Gerald Ford, is still outfitting, but the other 10 aren't steaming around the world all the time. Usually around 2 or 3 are. Sometimes, by the way, even fewer. And I remember about a year ago, or a couple of years ago, I remember reading that there were actually no US carriers on patrol. But the fact is, the United States does have that resource of 10 or 11 carriers that it can draw upon and which can send anywhere in the world. No other navy has that capability. And yes, it's absolutely true that missile technology has now evolved to the point where carriers are becoming increasingly vulnerable, and they're no longer perhaps quite the dominant naval asset that they were in, say, the 1960s. But having said that, if you want to control the sea lanes, if you want to have a presence everywhere in the world, as the US Navy does, if you want to have a visible presence everywhere in the world, and if you want to have the capability to intervene, you know, on the coast of Africa, in Latin America, in the Middle East, all those sort of places, you need carriers, and the United States has them, and no one else does to the same degree.
Yeah, Simon says you don't blockade China in the South China Sea. You blockade it from Singapore, the Malacca Strait, and the Gulf.
Yeah, I know. I understand that. But at the moment, what the Chinese are talking about is control of the South China Sea. I agree. As I said, the further away you move from China, the more the balance shifts against China. The closer you go to China, the more the balance shifts in China's favor. At the moment, the US Navy is dominant in the Central Pacific region, in areas like the Malacca Straits. But of course, the Chinese are aware of that. They have a major aircraft building program of their own. Eventually, they will be able to concentrate more warships in the Pacific itself. And the United States, with a smaller industrial base, has to consider the fact that whilst it has a worldwide Navy and a worldwide responsibilities and needs to be strong everywhere, China can concentrate its forces in one point. And that gives the Chinese a long-term advantage. So at the moment, yes, the US, in my opinion, does have the overall advantage, but that advantage is slipping.
Hey Man says, are the elite and globalist systems required to maintain peace? Without our current supply system, wouldn't we descend into chaos, empty shelves?
Well, I'm going to take that head on. I think that what the global system, the globalist system, is doing is not creating peace. It's creating a very unstable system where you see also how threatened supply chains can be. A minor disruption in one place can affect situation immediately, let us say in the United States itself. And that creates this very nervous situation where the United States provides the military instruments that the globalists have to use in order to preserve the system, that the United States military is obliged to operate everywhere all the time in order to keep everything running. A much more stable system would be a non-globalist system where, of course, countries could trade with each other, but where they weren't dependent on these, massive, overextended, brittle supply chains. That would be a more stable system. It would be a more peaceful system. And by the way, it would be far closer to the kind of system of world trade which is envisaged by the classical economists of the 19th century, which the globalists, whose works the globalists routinely misrepresent.
Yeah, peace. Irir says, given Putin's remark aimed at the U.S. overprinting of dollars, thereby destabilizing the world economy, how do you think the U.S. will feel about such a remark? We have a video on this coming out over the weekend, but Putin's statement about U.S. printing.
I'm going to endlessly. What I'm going to say is the US is going to ignore it. It's not going to be reported there, certainly not to any extent. And US officials, the people, well, the man in charge in the White House isn't listening anyway, so I mean, he doesn't care. But he doesn't know, nor is Kamala Harris, nor is anyone else. But, you know, the White House doesn't care. The Treasury Department isn't going to listen to what Putin says, and nor is the Fed, and nor are the Democrats, nor are the various economists who talk about, you know, how this is fine, we can just go on printing money indefinitely and it's going to be okay. They're not going to pay any attention to what Putin says. Most of them don't even know that Putin said this. Elsewhere in the world, it is different. In Russia itself and around the world, these comments of the Russian president carry traction and attract notice. But in the United States, which is now so completely self-absorbed, people ignore it.
I think Biden actually made a statement where he said that the printing is actually doing good.
Absolutely. He wants more.
We have to find that quote.
He wants more. He wants it to continue indefinitely, I think. I mean, that's...
he made a statement, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he thinks it's marvelous. He thinks it's the best thing ever. He says the printing machine is the greatest invention. Sorry, actually, printing machine. The electronic money creation is the best invention that's ever been. So there you go.
Well, here's the quote. I found it. Trillions more in borrowing and spending will reduce inflation. Trillions more in borrowing and spending will reduce inflation. So the printing actually reduces the inflation.
Absolutely. In case you didn't know.
According to Biden. Oh boy.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea. Let's put it like that.
That's a new one. That's for sure.
It's a new one. It's certainly a new one. Yeah.
From Ryan, lockdowns coming back mid-August for the USA, inflation rising, economy tanking, crime rising. There will be a severe reckoning, uprising. This is madness.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I think this is ludicrously wrong. I think it's extraordinarily dangerous. And what will they do? Well, obviously, they're going to try and tighten up even more because that's what people like that always do. But I think that we're going to see even more resort to the money printing machine because their concern increasingly now, it seems to me, is to control or to win the 2022 midterms. And the very last thing they want is to see an economic recession in the United States. And they're going to try to prevent that recession from happening by going ahead full speed with money printing. Printing more. Everything is connected. And that's always the thing to understand about these things. Everything ultimately is connected.
AJ says printing is the inflation.
Yeah, of course it is. Exactly. Yes. Yeah, it is. That is the most profound. That is the most profound and correct comment that anybody's made about this. I think that's brilliant. Actually,
has someone notified Joe Biden about that?
Oh no! I mean, I think, as I said, the great man. I mean, his mind is on higher things. I mean, he's already realised that, in fact, the more money you print, the lower inflation goes. So, what he wants to do is print money to infinity and it will all fall to infinity. So that's probably what he thinks. By the way, I was reading an article the other day by Dean Baker, who is a sort of very, very liberal left-wing economist, somebody who's very much associated with the Democratic Party and who's very anti-Republican and all of those things. And the fascinating thing was that he straightforwardly said that one of the reasons why the United States needs to continue with money printing is in order to prevent the Republicans winning the midterms. I was absolutely astonished at how straightforwardly it was said. I mean, it was something that I just did not anticipate. It was quite remarkable. And you can read his article. It's, I think, on Counterpunch. Inflation fears, economic policy, and the future of the US.
They're so hell-bent on staying in power.
Absolutely.
What are they going to rule over in the end of the day? This is one thing that they haven't understood. They're not going to have a country or a system to rule over if they continue doing this.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I entirely agree. But
they're burning everything down.
Yeah.
Everything.
I know.
On an economic level, on a social level, everything. They're literally just burning it all down.
Yeah, I
wonder if that's the plan all along. It's just to once again build back better. Just get rid of everything.
I completely agree. Yes. Coming to grips. Sorry, it was. I think coming to grips with inflation fears was the article. Well, anyway, I may be wrong, but anyway, I was really struck anyway by the extent to which, as I said, Dean Baker made it perfectly explicit that this is being driven now by political as opposed to economic imperatives.
It always is.
It always is. Yeah.
Let's see what people are saying in the live stream. Let's take some comments and questions from the live stream. Let me go through it, Alexander, and see what everyone is talking about here. Printer ink is the world's most expensive commodity. They are going insane, Klaus says. They are going insane. Let's see. Nanook says Greece had or has no money for military weapons. You got your F-4s and F-16s through NATO funding, not Greece money. Well, Greece has a huge military budget.
Absolutely. We have one of the highest military budgets relative to the size of our economy in NATO. I mean, we well exceed the 2% target, and there is no sign of that ending. And moreover, the arms manufacturers, especially the European ones, because that's where we get a lot of our weapons from, not our aircraft, but our tanks and our armored vehicles and all the rest, they absolutely love us for it. They think that it's absolutely great that we go on buying weapons at this astonishing scale.
Yeah, and Akarnan says Greece is under occupation. We do not own our economy or own resources, aluminum or gold these days. Look, when you give up your currency. Yeah. And this goes for all the countries in the EU. When you give up your currency, you have no more country.
Absolutely.
It's as simple as that. When you give up your currency, you're done.
Absolutely. I should just add in parentheses that I can remember Alexis Tsipras, our clown-like former prime minister, coming along and saying, well, the euro belongs to us as much as it does to the Germans and to the EU and all the rest. And when I heard him saying those things, I'm sure Alex remembers this. When I remember hearing those things, I said to myself, we are in serious trouble in Greece, because if Tsipras really believes that Greece has any ownership or title to the euro at all, then he is a complete fool. And so he turned out to be.
Yep, that's for sure. From Brian Stoner says, what happens if the United States falls? What happens to the West? Do we fall as well?
Well, the West, the Western civilization is not going to end with the fall of the United States. And we shouldn't be in a rush to talk about the fall of the United States. I think, despite everything, the United States is going through some very difficult times. I'm afraid it's going to go through worse times still. I still believe, partly I accept because I want to believe, that it will come through eventually. I want to see the US come through, and so I want to believe that it will come through. But nobody should be under any doubt at all that if there is a major implosion of American power, that will create massive disturbance, and it will affect every country. It will affect China too, by the way. China will have to struggle to absorb many of the negative consequences that follow from that, because the US is so central to the world economy. But ultimately, the West will survive, but the balance will shift eastwards. And I think in that case, we will start to see the focus of world power concentrated in Asia, and the primary capital would be Beijing.
Yeah. We Karen 20 euro super chat. What's wrong with the watching now numbers? You gain 20 views one moment and lose 10 the next, like a child playing with a light switch. Yeah. I've had times, Alexander, where I've seen like our subscriber counts where we've gained like 20 subscribers and I do a refresh and we lose 19. And that happens all the time. I mean,
it's absolutely. I mean, it's ludicrous. I mean, I did a video on my channel yesterday. These are not subscriber rates; these are views. And for about 3 hours, it was stuck at 9,542 views. It didn't go up. It didn't go down. It just stayed there. And well, I mean, what can I say? I mean, it's deeply demoralizing when you see that. Or at least it was. I have to say I've become hardened to it. All I can say is come to locals where we're setting things up and those sort of things don't happen. And
it's like you go through all the stages of grieving. We're at the acceptance stage. We got through the anger and the sadness, and we're at like the acceptance stage now.
Exactly. Well, we're actually beyond the acceptance. We're now at the stage where we are actually looking and doing things about it. So come to locals and you'll see what we're going to do then.
Thank you very much for that super chat. Really appreciate it. Hey Man says it took the British a few centuries to acknowledge the Pax Americana, and it came unwillingly after World War II. Will the Americans allow the world to move on? Great question.
It's a very, very good question. You're absolutely right, by the way, about the British. I mean, the British were divided about this in the late 19th and early 20th century. There were some very far-sighted people in Britain, like the then colonial secretary, Joseph Chamberlain, who said Britain can't continue. It's becoming overburdened. In fact, he spoke about Britain being the weary Titan that can't, is buckling under the weight of the burden it was carrying. And people like him looked and they said, which is the country which we can most influence, which is most like ourselves and which we could persuade to take over? And they looked to the United States. And that was to some extent the point where the US-British friendship was formed. I don't want to overstate things, and there are many people who have, I think, exaggerated views about that event, but there were people in Britain at that time who did look to the United States. Others, however, Churchill in particular, did not. Churchill was extremely dismayed by the decline of British power. He famously said that he had not been appointed the King's first minister to preside over the dismantling of the British Empire. And he had very difficult relations with the Americans during the war, and he tried to sell the Americans an idea of joint citizenship, which is a transparent device to use American power to sustain the British Empire. And he was very dismayed and depressed and angry when the Americans said no. So there are differences. But the British did eventually, grudgingly, especially after the Suez Crisis of 1956, come round to accepting it because they had no choice. I think the United States is going to find it much more difficult. Firstly, it starts from a stronger position than Britain had, certainly in the 1950s. Secondly, the successor state, if it is going to be China, and it's difficult to see any other country, the successor state does not share the culture and language that America and Britain have in common. And that makes it a much more disturbing successor than America was for Britain. And last but not least, the British never really fell into the trap of thinking of themselves as the exceptional country, the country that sees further, that knows better, that defines itself as the country that has to be different and must be the first in order to exist as a country at all. So they found it easier in the end to accept the transition to a position where they were no longer the dominant power. The US is going to find it much more difficult, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to say something, and here I speak as somebody who is British, because I've lived all my life here, and and strongly identify with the country. It's worth it. Being a normal country is a huge relief. The burdens of empire, psychological, economic, in terms of the inequalities it creates, the oligarchical structures that you suffer from, they're just not worth it in the end. And many British people would tell you that.
Yeah. Kurt wants to know, in light of the new UK anti-terror law, does the Duran have a backup plan, or will you start to discuss weather forecasts instead of politics? Alexander is going to do a channel on literature and Russian cinema, and I'm just going to pivot to a channel of, I don't know, just traveling around different places and filming.
Absolutely right.
Cats,
no, I mean,
birds or something.
I know. But seriously, I mean, we've actually done a program about these laws that are coming out in Britain, and they are deeply ominous and extremely disturbing, and a sign of how bad things are, and how bad they're getting, how they're getting even worse. But all I will say is, we will continue. We will go on. We will go on YouTube, and we are going to develop locals, and come to us there.
Yeah. Let's see here. Barando Commando just watched some videos about the Greek resistance to the Germans in World War II and how it was the only one in Eastern Europe that avoided being annexed by Germany. Definitely wasn't taught about this in school.
No. I mean, I should say that
the Greeks suffered very
heavily.
Losses as well.
I mean, it is a tremendously powerful memory in Greece, and one which affected everybody. I mean, my father, who was only a teenage boy, was a courier for the Greek resistance, and was at one point actually captured by Germans and faced terrifying consequences. But there was a German officer, and there were such people, who were sorry for him, and because he was only 14, and intervened to have him let go. But a lot of others, of course, didn't have that. So it was a terrifying, traumatizing experience, and it is one. I mean, all the Greeks did well. Not all the Greeks. There were collaborators too, but most Greeks did resist. And they resisted with extraordinary courage. Unfortunately, that resistance went wrong in the end and led to a very bitter civil war, which is also a traumatizing memory for the country. But the memory of the resistance itself is sacred for Greeks, and very close to where I live in Athens. Very close. I mean, literally a few, about 10 minutes walk away, there is the place where the Gestapo had its headquarters, and there is an extremely moving monument there for the people who were tortured and cruelly treated by the Gestapo in that place. The building itself was knocked down, but as a sort of monument was put in its place.
Yeah. Greek history, the modern Greek history.
Oh, yes.
Not the ancient. Modern Greek history is riddled with a lot of suffering.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which doesn't get talked about much.
No. Right. Absolutely true.
Anatoly says some troubling info coming out about possible side effects of the new shot technology. The shots might lose the ability to produce their own antibodies. Just suppositions for now, though.
We can't discuss it. I mean, I wouldn't be able to anyway. I don't have that kind of knowledge. But anyway, even if I could, I wouldn't, because I mean, our friends, I don't want us to. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Anatoly, for that. Michael Ende says inflation minus salary raise is equal to stagflation.
Absolutely, exactly true. And by the way, I mean, note that the second quarter output figures, which have now come out, were below expectations. I don't understand why they were below expectations, by the way, because they were exactly what and not just me, but lots of people. I mean, people far more informed about these things, were not only expecting, but were predicting. I mean, inflation, the idea that inflation leads to higher output is another interesting idea where I don't know where it's coming from. I mean, there's some very strange ideas circulating around at this moment.
Yeah, Anatoly says a girl who talks about Sims has over 1 million subscribers. The opposite of what is happening to channels like yours. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
I
mean,
there's actually channels, Alexander, in Japan, which are virtual hosts, like virtual people, I guess, not even real people, and they've got like millions of subscribers.
Well, there we go. Well, there we go. I mean, it tells you an awful lot about the state of the world, actually.
Yeah. All right. Let's. You want to take some more questions, Alexander?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's
do some more.
Yeah.
Let me go into the live stream. Thank you very much, GEC and Valius. Once again, a big thanks to their moderation and their help, keeping the channel moving along, keeping the stream moving along. I'm just going through the stream, Alexander. Love the trip to the Church of Lazarus. Thank you. Thank you very much. Not many people know about it. It drives me crazy, Alexander, with Cyprus tourism. Not many people know the history of the island because we don't promote it.
No,
we
absolutely
literally don't promote any of it. And we don't promote the Christianity or the history. All we do is we just sun and beach. That's it. That's all we say. Sun and beach, sun and beach. Just come because we have sun and beach. No one talks about the history, the people that stepped foot on this island, which just goes back thousands and thousands of years. I mean, I'm going to go to Bafos soon, and I'll show you guys Bafos, where Paul was preaching. There's actually places where Paul was tortured and whipped, and those places just kind of sit there, and tourists just walk by them, and no one thinks about it. There's no one talks about it. But anyway, that
is incredibly true. And by the way, it's got incredibly rich history. I mean, its history in antiquity, Cyprus's history in antiquity, is much older than parts of ancient Greece that you think of, Athens, Sparta, and the rest. You have monuments in Cyprus that predate that. You have an extraordinarily rich history as in the early Christian era. We see it with Paul being there. It has an extraordinarily interesting Byzantine history, which again people don't know about. And of course, it also has a very, very, very interesting medieval history too. I mean, Richard I of England, for example, was there. Was doing.
Was at his castle.
Absolutely. So I mean, all kinds of things. And by the way, they still make the wine that was served at his wedding feast in Cyprus, which is one of the most extraordinary wine, actually, Commandaria, which is, I think I'm right in saying,
Commandaria, the very wine, the very alcohol that Richard the Lionheart would drink.
Would drink, exactly. I think it's the oldest continuous wine brand in probably the world, and that's in Cyprus, and people don't know anything about it.
Yeah, Reckless says great interview with Christian.
Yeah,
Serbia.
We agree. I mean, absolutely. I mean, fantastic interview, I think, and one I would certainly urge people to see, and gives a tremendous insight into the situation in Serbia today. And I have to say, for me, a reassuring one, because I felt that Serbia was under an awful lot of pressure, but it seems as if it's absorbing the blows and doing so quite successfully.
Yeah, that was a very interesting revelation from Christian.
Yeah,
on Serbia and how well it seems. That's the impression that I got. How well Serbia is doing.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Simon says Cyprus part of the Mediterranean history since the Old Kingdom in Egypt, 5,000 years.
I was just much older than classical Greece, and people just don't know about it. It's astonishing, actually.
Sojourner says Elenibe Nicholas Gage was a great moving book on a Greek mother's struggle to save her children during World War II. Highly recommended.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah.
Thank you for that recommendation. AJ says, I've been to Crete, but not Cyprus. Crete is fantastic. Crete is a fantastic place.
Crete is absolutely fantastic. Again, very distinct from much of the rest of Greece, and of course, it too has an incredibly old civilization. And there is that building, fantastic people, and by the way, one of the most interesting cuisines in Greece. I mean, many people rate it the best in Greece.
Yeah. If you want to really eat well, go to Crete. That is true. Yeah. Alexander says, great interview on Serbia. Thank you, Alexander. Yeah. That was a fun interview. And once again, we want to thank Christian very much for taking the time out to talk with us. Very nice of him. Let's see here. I'm just going through and seeing the comments from the live stream, Alexander, because I think we got all the super chats. Yeah, we got all the super chats. All right, well, let me see if there's any more comments on the live stream. I guess we'll wrap it up, and we'll get on with our weekend.
We certainly will.
Yeah. Let's see the Revakist 2790. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Says locals is great. Yeah, locals is cool, and it's ours.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our community. So
absolutely, yeah. So do keep an eye on what we're doing there. Do sign up.
Rick wants to know, what are we going to do another show with Simone from Medicino? Well, soon.
Very soon.
We're going to dig very deep into Italy.
Italy, exactly. I mean, this is and this is from somebody who, as I said, is right at the heart of it and knows profoundly well all the labyrinth of Italian politics, and it is indeed a labyrinth.
Yeah. Hope you all are doing well. I was wondering if you are following the events in Nigeria, especially the recent indictments of Nigeria's super cop Abba Kire by the FBI. Once again, you guys are doing well.
Yeah, I have to say no is the short answer, and it's very remiss of me because Nigeria is so important, but there's only so many hours in the day. But again, Africa, we don't cover enough, and certainly not Nigeria either. I mean, at the moment, I'm still trying to get on top of South Africa, which we started to cover, and we've had a wonderful, I should say, response from our viewers about our coverage on South Africa, and we should start looking at that other African giant, which is Nigeria too.
Indictment by the FBI. That's
interesting. Well, it's very. I'm
gonna make a note of that because it sounds very interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. By the FBI.
Yeah.
What would the FBI be doing in Nigeria?
Goodness knows. Well, I mean, all sorts of things. I mean, and Nigeria's a very, very interesting place. I mean, it's obviously a major oil producer, but it's also a country which has many. I mean, an awful lot going. I mean, it's a very, very vital place, and at the same time, it's got many huge problems. It's got problems of corruption, problems of organized crime, and it's got a major, major problem with jihadi terrorism in the north. So I can actually imagine why the FBI would be there, but what this particular story is all about, I just don't know. I'm not going to try and guess.
Stephen says, can you guys cover the legality of governments making passport shot stuff? Man, Stephen, the reason I'm reading that is because we're going to do a lot of this stuff on locals. We're going to also cover a lot of U.S. Election stuff as well. So just we're putting everything together and in place, and we're very close to
absolutely
to wrapping that up.
All I'm going to say is legally very dubious. That's my view. Mm-hmm.
From Bianca, what do you think about the social credit score app planned in the UK that would track what people eat and how much exercise they do? I actually did a video on this, which I'll put up. Yes, have you heard about that?
Absolutely,
Alexander.
I mean, we criticize the Chinese and then we copy them. Who was it who once said that the sincerest form of flattery is imitation? I mean, it's the most. It's astonishing.
Can I say something about this food app? Yeah. I think it's actually very manipulative and very dangerous. What they're doing is they're habit training everybody. They're just getting, so they're starting with this very foodie friendly app, which people are going to say, oh, what's going to happen if I download this app? So what? It gives me rewards for eating well or for shopping well, and that's what they want everyone to think. Yeah. But what they're doing is they're just getting people to get into the habit to accept these types of government surveillance apps. And it's going to start with food, and then it'll move to carbon footprint apps and climate change. And you'll get rewarded if you purchase bugs when you go to the supermarket, or plant-based chicken substitute, or whatever the hell they're going to come out with. And then eventually, Alexander, as with all games, because I'm sure there are people here that are, really top-notch gamers. With all games, it'll give you rewards, then it'll give you strikes. Then they'll put the Britcoin, Richie Sunak talking about a Britcoin. When they put that Britcoin in place, that Britcoin, that digital currency, will basically say, okay, well, here's 1,000 Britcoins. You can use those Britcoins to buy crickets and moths, cockroaches, because those are full of protein and it's good for the environment. But you can't go and eat a really good juicy steak, not with those Britcoins. That's how they're taking this. So I find it very manipulative.
Well, it is exactly what it is. I mean, you've described it precisely. I mean, it is a way of adjusting people's behavior and ultimately influencing them without, of course, appearing to do so and pretending otherwise. And, when you try and do that, you're being deceitful and manipulative. And that is exactly what this is. I mean, you've discussed it precisely. I mean, what China does, let's be fair to the Chinese. What the Chinese do, well, they're absolutely open about it. I mean, I've seen it. I saw it for myself. It's straightforward. This is not straightforward. It's, as well as being
sneaky,
authoritarian, it's sneaky. Exactly. I mean, it's bad on both counts.
Hey man says, thanks, Alexander. You're a great teacher. Alex, you're awesome. I will continue to support as much as possible. Thank you very much. Hey, man. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Nicholas says, I think it's sad that many people, when hearing the name Byzantine Empire, they think of Romans, but not of Greece as well. That makes me wonder.
That's absolutely. I mean, the Byzantine Empire, I mean, of course, it didn't call itself that. Of course, it's called itself the Roman Empire. But of course, its language was Greek. And it was a profoundly Greek civilization in all its aspects. And if you know its history, it's an extraordinarily rich history. And perhaps one of the sad things for me is that foreign visitors who go to Greece, who are interested in monuments and antiquities and things of that kind, are so overwhelmingly focused on what are admittedly the tremendous antiquities of the classical world that they completely ignore the Byzantine Christian one. Athens, for example, is full of very beautiful Byzantine churches.
Yeah. From Wico, Mexico says, do you have any opinion about the role of Mexico in U.S. geopolitics? Greetings from Mexico.
Very good question, actually. I mean, I think Mexico is a very interesting country. Another country that, there's so many countries, but I mean, Mexico is a particularly interesting country to focus on because, of course, it's also, it's got an interesting president about whom I can't really say very much. I mean, I've heard a lot about him, but I've not really gone and sat down and, formed a clear view of him. But I mean, he certainly seems to be making moves. I mean, he's now sending economic aid to Cuba, which is interesting, and apparently is getting into an argument with the Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz axis about doing so. And of course, Mexico is a big country. It's an industrially developed country. It's got a lot of technology, by the way, and science. It's by no means, a sort of backward global south place. Is the kind of place in the global south that I think many people in North America imagine it is. But of course, it's got massive problems. It's also got huge historic violence. It's got the drugs. It's got all those things. But potentially, it is a giant. And its location, just south of the United States with, the shoreline on the Gulf of Mexico makes it a tremendously important country. And perhaps one day it will assert itself. I will see. I mean, it's got every potential to do so. And it'd be very interesting to see how Mexican and American US relationships sort themselves out. Of course, Mexico has long historic grievances towards the United States. I once read a comment once made by a former Mexican president of the 19th century, Porfirio Diaz, who once said, poor Mexico, so far from God, so close to the USA, which is a reflection maybe of Mexico's troubled times with the US in the 19th century. But it also seems to me that the two countries have a huge amount in common. There's a lot of connections now. Maybe they will be able to work out and forge a good partnership with each other, and will be able to develop a really strong partnership in North and Central America too. But I hope so, by the way. We'll see. And of course, by the way, Mexican food is ubiquitous around the world. Mexican music is outstanding. Alex, who knows all about painting, can talk about Mexican painting and Mexican painters. Who
I lived in Mexico for 4 years.
No, right? I didn't. I had no idea. Well, there you go. So you have much more knowledge of Mexico than I do. Absolutely,
it's a fantastic country.
Yeah,
Guerrero, Mexico. Here, any comments, insights, much appreciated from my day. Yeah. Alexander said it all. Mexico is a fantastic place.
Exactly, and I mean, what a history too, and what a culture, and it's got all the cultures of the pre-Columbian past, Tenochtitlan and Teotihuacan and all these, the Olmecs and the Toltecs, which are tremendous civilizations. So it's a sleeping giant, and one day it will wake. But again, it's a country really which we need to focus on. But I had no idea, by the way. You see, one learns new things every day about each other. I had no idea that Alex had lived for 4 years in Mexico.
The DF, Distrito Federal, yeah. Massive city, huge city.
Yeah.
21 million people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But what a city. Rich says, Mr. Mercuris and Mr. Cristoforo, can you have a discussion on the Italian naval buildup? Their submarine technology is second only to Russians. Their AIP technology is better than their AIP systems. Well, we're going to do a lot of
programs.
On Italy with Simone as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Can I just say, I mean, the points about Italy's submarine prowess is absolutely true. It was the Italians, by the way, who developed, frogman technology. It was the Italians who were in the Second World War sending frogmen under British warships and planting limpet mines and blowing them up. And one of the most stylish products the Italians make are Panerai watches, which are based on the watches that those original frogmen had. So absolutely true about Italian submarines, and indeed many things that, war things that the Italians make. I can tell you that one of the things many people don't know is that when the Soviets decided to start rebuilding their fleet after just before the Second World War, they turned to Italy for their naval architects. So they already had a very high opinion of what the Italians could do. And of course, Italy is so strong in so many fields. And of course, it has a very, very key role in the Mediterranean. Lots to discuss about Italy. And we're privileged to have this connection now, which will, with Simone, and which will enable us to discuss these things far more profoundly and with far greater insight than we could have done by ourselves.
All right, let's do some super chats and we'll wrap it up. Esteban Lehill says, no question, just wanted to say happy Friday. Mexico is amazing. The food, the culture, the people. Was just there last month. Seems to be doing well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that super chat. I agree. Mexico seems to be doing well. T. Oliver sends us a $10 super chat. Thank you very much, T. Oliver. And Darren says, how long do you think it will take for the Biden admin to try and disrupt South Korean and North Korean negotiations?
That's a very, very good question. That's an immensely good question, because it turns out that Kim Jong-un and I can't remember President Moon of South Korea, they've been exchanging letters with each other since April, which nobody knew about. And they've now reestablished their hotline, and there's talk about them meeting again. And I've always said, I mean, you can go onto the Duran and you can find articles which I was writing and we were writing on the Duran, extending way back into 2016, 2017, in which we said that if the United States wasn't very careful, there was a real possibility that one day the two Koreas would just get together and sort out their problems between them. I know that sounds bizarre and extremely unlikely given the kind of place North Korea is, but it's always a possibility. And as somebody who has been to Korea and spent time there and knows Korean people, I can say absolutely that it is far from a fanciful possibility. I don't think the United States is aware of the extent to which this is possible. I think you're absolutely right. I think the United States, or some people in the United States, instead of supporting it, they will try and disrupt it. Obviously, the United States has real interests in what goes on in Korea. I have to say straightforwardly that I think the present administration in Washington is so divided with itself that I don't think they're really going to do anything now to get in the way of what the Koreans are doing. When it was Donald Trump, he was able to take the initiative. He was able to go out, meet Kim Jong-un, come to all kinds of agreements, which were, of course, all sabotaged. But he did at least try. This bunch, the present lot, I mean, I don't think they think about North Korea at all. I think they're far too obsessed with other things.
Yeah. Has the Duran disabled the chat ability facility on their Telegram account? No, we have not. We have not, but let me take a look at that if something has happened.
Yeah.
I was working just the other day, so I'll take a look at that. Thank you for letting me know. And Sentinel with a 10-pound super chat says, free speech for the best content. Get over to the Duran.locals.com. YouTube is censoring the link. The Duran.locals.com. Absolutely. Yeah. Get over there. Thank you very much, Sentinel. So, Alexander, anything else you want to go over as we wrap this up?
Absolutely. I mean, not substantively, but just to say again, I mean, there is so much going on in the world. I mean, Mexico, as I said, which is now suddenly rising and becoming really important, is a good example. Nigeria, but there is now this overarching story of the return of great power competition, as the Pentagon put it, and that, interestingly, is providing space for other countries to start asserting themselves in all sorts of ways. And we'll see how all of these players move their pieces. But at the end of the day, whether it's peace or war, it depends on three capitals: Moscow, to a great extent, Washington, Beijing, most. Washington is dysfunctional, divided, and there is a power vacuum at the center. Beijing is purposeful and clear-sighted, but I'm afraid very overconfident. And so it's a tricky situation in the world. And I hope we can manage this. And I hope also that some of these very, very dangerous and ugly trends that we're seeing in the West do eventually encounter resistance and are thrown back. But about that, I'm not sure.
All right. David says the chat is not showing up on my Brave browser. If you're referring to Telegram, the Telegram chat only works on mobile. It does not work on the browser part of things. So it'll only work on your iPhone or Android. But I will take a look at that.
Right.
That's everything. Thank you, GEC812 and Valley. Yes, thank you very much for everything that you do. We really appreciate it. And Joseph came in with a 10-pound super chat. Thank you very much, Joseph, for that as well. And we'll wrap it up here. Absolutely. Thank you to everybody that sent us super chats. Thank you to everybody that gave us questions in the live stream and all your comments. We really appreciate it. And just a general thank you to everybody that helps keep this channel up and running. We really, really appreciate it, guys. Alexander, let's sign out.
Absolutely. And have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.